Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And right now, we've got, this is not Gerard, my mistake. This is Tyvar the Bellicose from Noah. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Bellicose? Bellicose? I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's Tyvar, non-Planeswalker Tyvar. This deck comes from Noah, who says, "This deck does one thing only, make big dorks. It'd be interesting to see it do a better job at being consistent. It's slow to start. Any budget?" And they say, "Nope." Thank you so much, Noah, for sending the deck. And as always, this deck list will be in the video description below. I highly recommend you open it up and take a look. See what you can think of before I start saying what I think, and see if we agree. Put any ideas about your own elf decks in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. So who's Tyvar the Bellicose? I'm just going to say Tyvar. Who's Tyvar, and why are we using them as our commander? Well, Tyvar is a 4-mana elf warrior who is a 5/4, which is very, very strong for an elf warrior. And it says whenever your elves, one or more elves attack, they gain Death Touch. And then each creature you control has, whenever a mana ability of this creature resolves, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the amount of mana this creature produced. This triggers once each turn. So what does that mean? Well, that means, let's start with the idea is what is a mana ability? For those who are maybe newer or not, maybe don't know all the intricacies of Magic, a mana ability is an ability that among whatever it does generates mana. Now, why is that important? That's important because your opponents cannot react to mana abilities. So, for example, looking at Elves of Deep Shadow, your opponent cannot respond to you tapping Elves of Deep Shadow to get the mana. You'll tap it, you'll get the mana, and then it'll do 1 damage to you. This is very similar to how lands work, right? You cannot react to your opponents tapping their lands, even if a land would deal damage or have another trigger. Now, that's not always the case. Some of them still will have their triggers, such as, I think the one is City of Brass, where when it's tapped, you take damage as opposed to it like paying a life or taking a damage as a part of the resolution of the mana. But the idea is mana abilities, you just cannot interact with them. Now remember that spells that create mana are not mana abilities, they have to be specifically abilities. So moving back to this, Tyvar says that whenever a creature taps for mana, this will trigger, and whatever mana came out of that creature will be given to him in +1/+1 counters. So Tyvar turns all your mana dorks, and I don't know if you know this, but elves are known for their mana dorks. It turns their mana dorks into kind of beefing up their creatures each time. Every time they tap for mana, they get stronger. This is a really fun and interesting ability, and I've recently turned one of my green-black elves deck that my partner and I, she's played it a few times. I've turned that into kind of Tyvar slowly. So I was really excited to see this deck because I think it has a lot of the things I've been thinking of. And so we're going to take a look at it and see what we can change and what we can improve. Now, the first thing, as always, we're going to look at the mana curve. The mana curve is really nice here. It makes sense that we start out low and we get higher. Now, we are a ramp deck, so we have a lot of versatility in what we're playing, but at the same time, the majority of our elves tend to be lower mana. So there's a nice little balancing act that happens here, where all of our ramp is low, and then we have a few higher cost cards to make up for it. We'll go to 9 and we'll see that it's in Garrick's Wake. I actually have a different suggestion at this level, but we'll come back to that. At 8, it's Eldrazi Conscription. At 7, we've got Planeswalkers, and then we go down to 5 where it's normal. Now, as always, because we have a 4-mana commander, we're going to take a look at what the other 4-mana, I don't know if you can hear the thunder outside. It's a really nice rainy day here. So looking at the other 4 drops, we're going to see what can stay and what will be cut out. So a lot of these are going to stay because of the deck's ability to ramp a lot of mana. and the fact that most of the deck functions only when Gerard, my goodness, Tyvar is out. And so we're not going to be too worried about some of these cards. So for example, without Tyvar, your creatures don't gain +1/+1 counters. Without the +1/+1 counters, you're not going to cast Corpsejack Menace, right? So interestingly enough, with that in mind, Corpsejack Menace will literally never be cast before Tyvar. So there's actually no competition between those two cards. But let's take a look at the other ones. Gerard is an elf, so it's on theme, is incredibly powerful once you have a really beefy, like low mana creature, or like high power elf that's been tapping for a lot of mana, because with one sacrifice, you can drain the entire table of their health. Maybe not drain, like make them lose the life because you don't gain it. And then Gerard has some passive abilities that you don't really care about in the same way. You really just want I just thought of a card. Sorry, I'm gonna quickly note this card down before I forget as a fun bonus card. So Gerard doesn't really have other cards that are particularly as good. Gerard's other abilities aren't as good in this deck, and I think that's fine. You're really just playing it for that center ability, and it's so powerful that it's worth playing. So absolutely play Gerard. Tanuki Transplanter is adorable. It says dog. I thought Tanukis were like raccoon dogs. Maybe I don't quite understand what they are, but this is one of the few cards that we have that is not an elf, yet it produces mana. And the reason I think that's really good here is that one, it already it already is really, really strong. When it attacks, you add green equal to its power, and then you put that many +1/+1 counters on it. And then every subsequent time you do this, Tanuki or the card it's attached to will gain more and more power and tap for more mana. And I think that's a really, really fun kind of setup. It does kind of suck that it is at 4 mana, but I think it's a really fun card and that has a really high ceiling. So I think it's absolutely worth playing there. Natural Order is an essentially amazing card, but when I look at the deck, I think it's just for Nyxbloom Ancient, really, right? That's the card we want to do, and I think that's worth it. I think that's fine to use this card for that one cause. I think there might be other cards that could do this better without being at 4 mana. I'm thinking maybe Eldritch Evolution. There could be setups. So Eldritch Evolution, this is 7, so you need to sacrifice a 5-drop. But you don't have that many. Okay, maybe Natural Order is the best, but regardless, I'm mainly okay with it because the power of getting that Nyxbloom Ancient is so high that I think it's fine. Triumph of the Hordes feels a little strange. I get it's there because Infect is a big boogeyman, but with that in mind, I don't think we're using the spell. Sorry, I walked out of the room because the door's open. I hope that didn't change my echo too much. Um, I don't think I don't think it's as good as some of the other options. And that reasoning is that it's 4 mana. It's really just that. It's that 4 mana, which is just a tough number for this deck. And it does make a lot of boards more lethal than it would be otherwise, but it also creates a bit of a problem, right? Because if you, let's say you have a very large lethal attack, and you just need to give everything trample and attack everyone. So you do that, you play Triumph of the Hordes, you attack everyone with the idea that no matter how they block, they're going to take, 10 infect. But then 2 of the 3 players use removal or do some kind of trick you weren't ready for, and they stop all but 9 of that infect damage. They get 9 infect damage each, the 3rd player is out of the game, and it comes back to your turn. Well, you've kind of wasted that attack, right? This is the downside that people don't often talk about when it comes to infect, is that when you don't have a dedicated infect deck, any infect damage you do that's not lethal, if you can't back it up, it's just wasted, right? Now you might say, well, 9 of infect damage, that wouldn't have been lethal if it was just regular damage. Well, that's not necessarily true because the other ones give a much higher +1/+1 ratio, more a higher ratio than +1/+1. If we compare it very directly to Overwhelming Stampede, you are gaining a lot more. Like if we think Triumph of the Hordes as a +2/+2 because of Infect, Overwhelming Stampede is very easily like a plus, maybe +6, +10, anything like that. And I think it's a much stronger card. So though it's a good card, once again at 4 mana, I don't particularly love it. Deadly Rollick is free, so I'm not going to be too direct on that. That's fine. Death Sprout, I don't like Death Sprout in a deck like this. Ramping is not your problem, and removal is. And this has 2 black in it. I'd much rather like Infernal Grasp, which I actually should check if you are playing. You are. Okay. Then I would like the next one to be, I don't know, a number of different cards you can do. Even just Doomblade, Go for the Throat, and the like. Sorry, not Deadly Rollick. Death Sprout is just a clumsy amount of mana and the main reason you play this card is for the ramp effect, and you don't need that ramp effect in a deck like this. There's a lot of other green black decks I think this card is very strong in. It's just not in this one. All right, let's look at our last few enchantments. Guardian Project is really, really strong in a deck like this. We're running 23 creatures. We could be running more really easily, and so this is really good. Leyline Immersion, on the other hand, I don't really like. I think this is a card that sticks out at me as a particularly weak card. It's 4 mana. It only applies to a few of your creatures because you don't have that many legendary creatures. And it's just fine. The board too is nice. And I guess with Tyvar, you're not really doing anything with him. So I get the idea of attaching this to him and then tapping for mana. But it's dead in your hand a lot of the time. And even then, I don't know if I love it. So I kind of don't like this. I would probably suggest cutting that. Now let's go quickly look around, see if there's any cards that I also think maybe could go. I think a few cards that stick out at me are Igor Shadiki feels really, really strange here. I'm not quite sure why she's here. Um, I guess they're here. I don't actually know the gender of this Naga wizard, but Igor Shadiki feels just a little strange. I don't know. I get that the perk of a few attacks to gain tons and tons of life is really, really good. But the way this deck works is that if you're hitting people with your elves, they're probably losing the game. Like if you can get your 6/6 and like 12/12 elves to hit your opponents, the game is ending. Do you really need to be gaining life against that as well? Whereas maybe you could be using a lifelink ability instead. The other thing is our creatures all have higher, almost even toughness and power, but there's a few of them, like Tyvar himself, that have higher power, so losing a bit of that life instead of lifelink is a bit strange. So overall, just feels like a bit of a strange card here. Defiler Vigor's great. Let me see. There's a few that I keep seeing that. Glissa Sunslayer feels weird here. She's an interesting card. I do like she's always had this since she's been Phyrexianized, corrupted, completed. Since she's been completed, she's always had first strike death touch, which is really cool like as a defensive thing, but really kind of bad as an aggressive thing. And then what are we really using her for? To draw a card each turn? Only if she attacks and hits a player? I don't know. I think she's really, really weak. I wouldn't put her here. Likewise, Well-Wisher feels like it belongs in a more traditional elvish elf tribal deck, whereas here it's just kind of like, oh, okay, it doesn't tap for mana, it doesn't get bigger. That's all right. You're not too worried about that. Okay, then looking around a few others, Harvest Season feels a little strange. Once again, mana is not really where you want to be. Don't get me wrong, this can skyrocket your mana, but realistically, is that really that much different? Like, 3 of your creatures can tap for like tons and tons of mana, right? Some of the, like Priest of Titania, Elvish Archdruid, Circle of Dreams Druid. these are really good cards that tap for a lot of mana. If you harvest Season After, you could be getting 4 or 5, forests and swamps into play. But even then, like, doesn't that pale in comparison to the mana that your elves are already uh, creating? I just don't like it. I'm gonna try to replace this with some card draw because I think that's a lot stronger. Garrick's Wake, let's come back to that in a second. I just want to see the rest of what we have. Sudden Spoiling continues to be a card I don't quite understand the purpose of. If it's stopping an attack and then you get to block really, you get to block in a really fun way, I think that's cool. But most likely you're tapping your own creatures down to create mana to like forward your game plan. So you don't really have blockers to block the 0/2s. So if they're attacking you and you don't have blockers and you're doing this to prevent damage, why not just play Fog? It's just more reliable and lower mana. Otherwise, if you're doing this to stop some kind of infinite combo, you know, it doesn't actually work, right? Because they can just if you have like Blood Artist, like an Aristocrats combo, and you're trying to stop me with sudden spoiling, I'll just wait until the next turn, right? There's usually not a downside to just going, okay, we'll try again next turn. So I don't particularly like this card here. Uh, Predator's Rapport as well. This is a 3 mana life gain card. I don't think you need this life gain. You can toss that out. Then finally, there was one more that I saw here. Oh, there it is. Oblivion's Hunger gives a creature indestructible. And hold on, I'm just going to pause. All right, sorry about that. So, in Oblivion's Hunger gives indestructibility to one of our creatures, and then you draw if it has a +1/+1 counter, which seems cool, but it is really not worth it. I think if you want this kind of effect, you can get indestructibility as low as 1 mana in both green and black, and then I believe there might be even ones that put +1/+1 counters onto creatures, but the selective card draw on this isn't great, especially since half the time you want to use this onto Tyvar, who will not naturally have +1/+1 counters on it. So, unfortunately, I don't know if that's the one here. And so, Eldrazi Conscription is the other one I wanted to say. So we have a bunch of like high mana cards that are kind of our finishers, right? Garrick's Wake, Akroma's Memorial, and Eldrazi Conscription. Now, don't get me wrong, this art for Eldrazi Conscription is bomb. Absolutely love it. Fantastic. And if you're playing it for the art, I have no disagreements with you. However, if you're playing it for the effect, I do have some disagreements for you. I don't really think this is the effect you want. +10/+10 and trample is not bad, and either two is great, but your creatures are already big, and you've got better, more efficient ways to give trample to your entire board. With that in mind, I'm just not too impressed by this card. And Garrick's Wake is really interesting because it represents a form of win condition where you wipe everyone's board and attack with all your creatures. But that doesn't work as cleanly as you think because you might have to tap down some of your creatures to source the 9 mana that is required for this card to work. So, though it can be really good sometimes, I think other times it's going to be just fine, and I have a different kind of solution here. Akroma's Memorial, on the other hand, I think that's great. Eldrazi, the Eldrazi statue, or the Eldrazi, what was it? Let me see. I just said statue, must have been listening. Monument. Eldrazi Monument might also be an acceptable version because flying is probably just as good. Because I don't think it gives trample. Oh, it does give trample. Okay, so maybe Akroma's Memorial is better and doesn't require sacrifice every turn. But yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I think Akroma's Memorial is great. I think you'll have a pretty good time with that. Get a few attacks in, and of course, Vigilance is very, very relevant here. All right, so those are generally my notes on the cards already in here. I would also maybe suggest you could go up like 1 or 2 lands pretty easily. You are a ramp deck, so the production of mana isn't too bad, so you don't need to worry so much of having 32 lands. But you do need to have at least three mana and a dork to play Tyvar. And I think right now it's a bit low. There's something there's a card I was gonna suggest, but I think I just sum them up here as I think you'd be pretty happy if you were playing just a few a few more Llanowar Elf style effects, right? A few more one drops that tap for mana. Oh, you're already playing the ones, but this is just an example, right? There's plenty more I think that we can play. Like, let's see if we just type elves and go by mana cost. I think most of like Findhorn Elves was actually the one I was thinking of. The Findhorn Elves and the rest, you do have a lot of one mana green creatures that tap for mana. Now, granted, a few of them don't work. Arbor Elf doesn't work because it untaps lands as opposed to producing mana, but it's close. You know, you can still run it for the early mana production and then just, ignore it otherwise. We're just a little low on the first few mana producers in this deck. So I think you could really benefit from those. But let's go into the cards that I think you would benefit the most from. Let's see, probably in no particular order. Let's see. A few more untappers, I think, could be nice. The fact that when you untap, you only get the benefit once a turn, so you don't want too many untappers. However, it's still very, very strong to be able to untap your creatures so that they can both attack and tap for mana. And Copperhorn Elves is really, really, or sorry, Copperhorn Scout is really, really good at this because you attack with this creature and the rest of your really very big creatures, they all untap. And now they have to contend with the fact that your big creatures are getting hit by a 6/6 Priest of Titania with the threat that if you tap her after she's unblocked, she can put another 5+1/+1 counters on herself. Bam, that's an 11/11. That's pretty scary. It's also like straightforward. You don't need to overthink Copperhound Scout or like pay mana to untap things. It just works. Eventually, she'll be blocked and destroyed, but until then, she's a very very good creature, especially at low mana. Quiron Ranger works a little bit like this, except for it bounces a force. You can untap once each turn. There is a really strange world where you can do this on every turn in the turn cycle because Tyvar says once a turn, not once like. And because of this, they have the same text, so you can retap, untap the same very big creature that like Gyre Sage or a few others that taps dependent on its power. And when you have that, you can end up in exchange for like 3 forests into your hand, you could have an enormous Gyre Sage, which you could probably use other spells to win with. So that can be very, very strong. Wirewood Symbiote is an insect, not the elf that we see, but it works almost identically. It has the benefit of bouncing elves into your hand, which is sometimes more of the ability that you want, but it's good to know otherwise. A few more generally good cards here. I have, let's see, Rite of Consumption here. Rite of Consumption is a sacrifice a creature to deal damage to target player. It's like a black fling and you gain the life. I think this can replace any of those life gain cards. It's not ideal because it's not like Drawn who hits all players. This one just hits the player you target. But still, it does drain for a substantial amount. So there's certain situations where you have a very, very large creature that could be lethal, but is not against your final opponent. And Rite of Consumption allows you to get that attack in unblocked, and it's just a pretty nice card. And occasionally you can use it just as a life gain card. Another black card. I'm gonna be honest, I think the rest of the cards I'm going to give you are all black, but Retribution of the Ancients is really, really, really good here. Like, so, so unbelievably good. Retribution of the Ancients is the kind of card, I've talked about it as I use it in Brina, but it's just generally so good when +1/+1 counters are in large supply. And in a deck like this, you have a large supply of +1/+1 counters, and you have a large supply of mana. Now, black mana is harder to come by than green in an elf deck, but it allows you to hold up dual lands that are green and black and just not spend the green out of them, keeping them for Retribution of the Ancients. You have to remember, like, it's really hard to not talk how good this card is that there are board states that you will look down, count the number of black mana that you have with certain cards like Gyre Sage, which I believe produces mana of any color, but I could be wrong. No, that was just green. But I believe there's another one. Where is the... Yes. So Heron Blade Elite, which can grow very, very large, So your Heron Blade Elite can get to the point that it can tap for, let's say, 4 or 5 black mana. And let's say you have a few lands that tap for black mana. Basically, on a board where you're ahead, Retribution of the Ancients represents a destroyed creature for each black mana that you have. Now, there are certain boards this is not going to work out because everyone has 10 cents. Okay, that's fair. But that's not always the case. Most of the time, there's just a variety of different creatures at different toughness levels that you need to deal with. So, like, destroy Dark Confidant there, destroy, a Dreadeth Magistrate here, destroy the Arbiter. Like, there's so many targets all of the time. Retribution of the Ancient can just get you so far ahead. So I cannot stop talking about this card. It is really, really good. After that, I want to suggest another black card that I think is a nice payoff instead of Garrick's Wake, and that's Peer into the Abyss. Why Peer into the Abyss? Well, this could be your finisher. Peer into the Abyss draws you half your deck for half your life. That is exceptionally strong. There's going to be setups where you cannot attack, you cannot immediately win the game, but you have nearly infinite mana. In these setups, Peer into the Abyss are going to be so strong. You're going to be able to draw so many cards and immediately start chaining them together. You have several sorceries that untap your creatures. You have cards like Tyvar the Planeswalker that make your mana drops come in and have haste immediately. This is just going to get out of hand incredibly quickly. It is a massive cost of mana and a massive black mana cost of 3 black, but it is such a fun card in a deck like this. Like, you're going to cast this, and your opponents are probably just going to concede on the spot, most likely. Speaking of draw, I think the deck could use a little more card draw. So nice and easily, Nice Whisper draws you 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Read the Bones, I can't stop talking about this card. It's very, very good. And then, of course, as mentioned before, we're in a tribe, and we're in black, and we're in a tribe that goes very, very wide. Pact of the Serpent draws you so many cards. It puts you astronomically ahead, and then you can use all those cards immediately. It's not exactly Peer into the Abyss, but it's pretty close. With this, on a turn with a lot of mana, you can sometimes just win from the spot. If not, I'm going to recommend Diabolic Intent, and I'm going to recommend Profane Tutor. I think both of these cards are really, really good in this deck. A deck like this benefits very, very heavily from a tutor or two. Now, I'm not sure, I'm going to check again if you're playing Worldly Tutor. You are. Having Diabolic Intent and Profane Tutor are really nice additions to a card like that. You have certain cards that when you play, you just win the game, like Overwhelming Stampede or our big, I always forget its name, Nyx Bloom Ancient, things like this that just basically say, Akroma's Memorial, that just say, okay, I guess the game is done. So being able to tutor them into your hand is really, really nice. Both of those cards are pretty cheap right now. I would play either or. Then 2 more cards I'm going to suggest. Once again, all these cards are in black. But Unearth is one of them, and Life and Death is the other one. Why these 2 cards? Well, as I've said before, if you're in green-black, Life and Death is pretty free to play. It's a 2-mana reanimate spell, as in reanimates as in the card, not just the ability, which is really, really good. And Unearth is a 1-mana reanimate spell for the majority of your deck. If you look at a lot of the cards that grow really, really fast in mana, such as Marwyn the Nurturer, or where are we? Circle of Dreams Druid, and Elvish Archdruid, these cards are really, really strong, and they represent some of the strongest, fastest growing cards, Priest of Titania as well. So having cards that just reanimate those cards when they die, because unfortunately they will die or you win the game, is really, really helpful. In black, these cards are really, really cheap. And though you're not playing Eternal Witness, they kind of work like Eternal Witness because they bring back the best cards in your deck. So really, really like them. Now, I have one more suggestion. And this is the silly fun suggestion, but I do actually want you to think about it. I'm laughing too because it is a 4-mana card, so it's breaking my own rule a little bit, but I think it's interesting enough that it is worth mentioning. And it is Necrotic Ooze. There was a time in Magic, and especially in Modern, that this card was talked about constantly. It must have been really early in Modern, now that I think of it. But Necrotic Ooze is such a crazy, strange card. Necrotic Ooze gains all of the activated abilities of all of the cards in your graveyard and everyone else's graveyard. Why is this relevant? Well, this is interestingly enough a way to mix and match abilities, especially mana abilities, off of. Oh, I think I said abilities. I meant activated abilities specifically. But regardless, it gains all the activated abilities, and this is a great way to mix and match different activated abilities on different creatures. Some of your creatures have much better activated abilities than others, and some of them have them at different points in time. What do I mean by that? Well, when you have 5 creatures, Circle of Dreams Druid taps for 5 green. After that, so let's say you have a Necrotic Ooze. You tap it with the Circle of Dreams Druid. All of a sudden, it taps for 5 green, becomes a 9/8 black creature. Well, on your next turn, you use instead Heron Blade Elite. Because now you still have the 5 creatures, but it has 9 power. So now it taps for a higher amount, right? And then adds another 9 counters. Then if you have anything that removes counters for himself, like Walking Ballista, or anything in general that can use activated abilities, or your opponents even do, wow, what a powerful, powerful card. If you aren't all already aware, and I'm surprised that it's not in here actually, Devoted Druid goes infinite. In fact, doesn't it already kind of go infinite in this deck? You tap it for a green, it goes +1. You put a -1, it goes back to neutral. You tap it for a green. Oh yeah, yeah. So you have infinite mana with Devoted Druid. Why is that not a thing? I feel like that's the first card you put into this deck. Yeah, put this card into your deck. You will get infinite green mana immediately. Huh. So play this card as well. But if for some reason this card is dead, Necrotic Ooze will do the exact same thing with, any mana producer in and of itself. So this is just the pitch. I'm not going to be too insistent on Necrotic Ooze, but I do think it's rather funny. And I think that'll be the end of my suggestions. This deck looks like so much fun. I've been kind of playing around with it in paper, and looking at this list gives me so many more ideas to put together. Actually, one thing I did want to talk about, Golgari Kieran feels really strange here. I get that it turns into a creature and therefore gets +1/+1 counters, but it's so slowly. I just don't understand why this isn't Talisman of Resilience or Golgari Signet. Whatever. I'm gonna let that go. But otherwise, what a statement. But otherwise, he says. But otherwise, I say, I do really like this deck. I think it's really, really strong and really fun to play. And it has a really fun, straightforward, strong game plan with a lot of different ways to kind of get the numbers out and make it the most functional it can be. So with that in mind, I would love to see another draft of this deck. And if you're going to send me another draft, you can find a link in the video description below to send me that draft of this deck or any draft of any deck. And down there, there's also a link if you'd like to bring your deck up to the front of the queue, so it'll be the next one I work on. And finally, if you want to hit the like, subscribe, all of the buttons, maybe not the report button, but all of the other buttons, I would be so grateful. The channel is still growing, and any help is appreciated. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing more of this deck, and yeah, it just looks great. All right, good luck.